Today's AUC people, and I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Karl Jechoutek, who has been part of our community here at AUC for many years now, although he spends part of the year away from South Africa and part of the year in Cape Town. But during the times when he's here, he's been quite regularly part of our congregation. So welcome, Karl. Great to have you joining us.
Good to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your life right now. Are you retired, and where are you living? You're in South Africa at the moment, but I know you spend some of your time elsewhere. What's your current situation?
I am retired, have been retired for the past 20 years, but retired in a way that keeps me busy. And because when we made the decision, Karen and I, that I would retire, Karen said it's all right, but before you retire, make a plan to keep intellectually active. You cannot just sit around and enjoy life. So I took that advice and did that, and went back to university. And
so what does that look like, keeping intellectually active in retirement?
Well, I started on courses here at UCT after we had decided to establish a base here, and I browsed through various courses in history and philosophy, and ended up in religious studies, and eventually found a professor who would supervise my doctoral thesis, and finished my retirement doctorate here in religious studies, and then started doing research and publishing using both my fields, using the economics and using the religious studies, and do research and publish at the interface of those two.
Okay, so you're doing some writing and some publishing?
Yes, in the last 10 years I published 2 books. And I'm looking around for another interesting niche that has not been dealt with yet.
Okay. Wow, very interesting. So, Karl, take us back to the beginning. Jechoutek, I think you were saying that's a Czech name.
It's a Czech name.
But where were you born? And tell us a little bit about your family and your upbringing.
Right, I was born in Vienna, in Austria. But I grew up speaking Czech at home and at primary school in Vienna, and German everywhere else, so I grew up bilingually. All my grandparents were migrating from the countryside, what is today Czech Republic,
okay,
during the time of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, about 1900. They all migrated because there were no jobs in the villages, migrated to the big city, and settled in an area where I grew up that is a low-income, migrant-heavy area where a lot of immigrants and migrants were settling. And so as all my grandparents were Czech speakers, my parents also were Czech speakers, although they were born in Vienna. And so at home we kept the language going, and everywhere else I spoke German. So it was an interesting time. I was born immediately after the Second World War, and the first 6 years of my life I grew up in this low-income area. We were living in a one-room flat, with no indoor plumbing. Cold water and toilets were shared with 6 other apartments out in the hallway. And but I didn't know anything else, so that was fine with me. And when I then started school, my parents had scraped together enough to get a bigger rental apartment with indoor plumbing, and I thought that was the height of luxury. I just thought I was in paradise. You know, we had a bathroom, we had a toilet, it was fantastic. So it's my parents tried very hard. Right after the war, there were very few jobs, so they had to get by odd jobs and just scramble to get anything together. My father used to smuggle milk for me from what was then Czechoslovakia. Because there was very little in Austria, so I survived, and that's how things went.
And were you part of a big family? Do you have siblings?
No. I was a single child. I have a small number of relatives in Vienna. One cousin on my mother's side, one cousin on my father's side, and their families. And so it's a very compact family. When I married into Karen's family is very extensive, and she came with 16 first cousins.
Wow!
So it took me some time to get used to such very large families, but I survived that too.
And so, did you grow up in Vienna?
Yes.
Were your school years in Vienna?
Yes, my school years in Vienna. Finished my matric equivalent there, and started studying at the School of Business and Economics, and finished my master's there.
Still in Vienna?
Yes, still in Vienna. And it was mostly in business, but there was one very motivating young professor who was teaching development economics, and that lit a fire. There was a spark, and I thought that is really something interesting that I want to do. And then when I got a chance to get a scholarship to the United States for 2 years, so I decided to focus on economics, and specifically on development economics. And that's what I did.
And Karl, I mean, you described your early years as quite poor in relative terms. It's a very relative term when you live in South Africa.
Yes, but it was in a way relatively it was a very poor area.
And I mean, did that shape your desire to study economics and perhaps your interest in development economics?
Well, it did, because I knew how difficult it was to survive. I benefited from my parents' determination to really make things work, and they worked very hard. And
what did your parents do?
Before the war, my father was a barber, and my mother was a secretary in a company. After the war, they had to redo everything because there were no jobs. So they ended up being both together, working from home, being representatives for companies in the then Czechoslovakia that wanted to export but didn't have the contacts and so on. So for some time after the war, that was needed, and so they found this little niche and did that kind of work. So my father was traveling quite a bit, and my mother was holding down the fort with me, and so they built up. It was just the two of them working from home, but built up a decent career in doing that. And so again, they were hoping that I would get into that and take over from them, but that's later on when I was studying, the time for these kind of intermediaries was ending, because every company had their own contacts. They didn't need people to intermediate, to translate, to organize things. So I didn't think that was a lot for the future, and I struck out into the world. And well, by that time I had met Karen, and so again, here was this restless spirit who was. Who did a lot of international travel already and studying abroad and so on, and so that seemed to fit very nicely. And
okay, so you did your degree in economics, and then you
degree in economics in my master's in economics in Austria, then my PhD in economics in the United States in Wisconsin.
Okay, Wisconsin.
Yes, University of Wisconsin.
Okay, and I mean, you said you grew up bilingual with Czech and German. One would assume you're moving to the US to do a PhD. You must have learned English along the way.
That's my third language that I'm fluent in, and so it was interesting. It was expanding my horizons. It was, and Karen and I had about the same outlook that living internationally would be the thing. So that's when we got married, when I just finished my studies in the States.
Did you meet her in the States when you were?
I met her in Vienna. She was studying in Vienna. Was studying art history in Vienna because she had been a history teacher before that. She had a degree in history and was teaching history in schools, and but then she thought she wanted to get into art history and maybe do some museum work and so on, or art education, that kind of thing. So and Vienna was a good place for art history to study. So she really scrambled to bring her German up to speed to understand these professors, and she was struggling, but she was doing okay. And so then we after I finished in Wisconsin, we got married, and then I thought there will be a job somewhere. Karen's parents were not that enthusiastic about somebody with a degree but no job. But
3 degrees and no job.
That's right. But they relented, and so then I got a job with a consultancy firm in London. The Economist at that time had a big consulting arm, and they were doing project analysis, looking at projects in developing countries, some of them for the World Bank and so on. So we spent about 4 or 5 years in London, and but not always in London. We spent almost a year in Tanzania on a project in the Kilimanjaro region. So we stayed there in the middle of nowhere. It was very beautiful countryside, and so we enjoyed that greatly.
And how did this sort of you're moving around to London, Tanzania? How did that coincide with Karen's career, and were children on the agenda for you?
Well, that was children came on the agenda at about that time. Karen's career, she she put on the back burner, which I was very thankful for. And looking back, it was quite a sacrifice for her because she was thinking of doing a lot of work in art, and but with our moving around, it was very difficult for her to do that. So she put that on the back burner for a while, and then when we started to think about starting a family, then we thought, maybe this kind of job for me wasn't the right thing, because I was down for potentially long stays in very remote areas with very poor medical services, and so we didn't think starting a family under those circumstances would be good. So I was happy to accept a job at the World Bank based in Washington, D.C., with a lot of traveling to developing countries, but still with a solid base in Washington, so we could, with a good conscience, start a family. And so that's when we moved with our infant first daughter. We moved to Washington and established ourselves there.
And for how long did you stay in Washington?
Almost 25 years.
Wow, that's a very long time.
So yes, it's been a long time. We were very well integrated there, so to speak. Karen, being American, was of course a good thing for her. Although we had originally, as we got married, we decided that we really want to live somewhere where neither of us has a cultural advantage. So basically Austria and the United States were not really on the table there. So we ended up in London, and so which was new for both of us. And but then moving to Washington and the World Bank, that was a very international environment, and so we thought, that still satisfies our criteria, that neither one of us has a big advantage. So that was okay. It was very interesting. The staff at the World Bank, of course, comes from all over the world.
Yes.
And
so what was your role at the World Bank?
I started as an economist working on project evaluation in developing countries, mostly all over Asia, and traveling with teams to evaluate projects for financing, and doing the economic analysis, the economic policy, the cost-benefit analysis, and so on. And so that's how I started there, and then later I got more into economic policy issues and advising governments, discussing with governments economic policy reform. I got into middle management in the World Bank and tried to run a kind of departments that were consisting of highly intelligent but quite eccentric people, and which was also a good learning process.
Yeah.
And so that's how I moved along, and then at the time that our daughters were starting to leave the house.
How many children did you have?
Two daughters, Christina, the first one, and then Maria was the second one. And two wonderful daughters, and they grew up mostly because of Karen's influence of being very independent young people. And Karen always made the point that women should stand on their own feet and not be dependent, not be subservient. So that's how they grew up, and that's how they turned out.
And identify themselves as Americans, or did they have a sense of your...
They have a sense of both, because they grew up bilingually. We spoke both languages at home, German and English. Not Czech, because that would have been a bit too much, and I wasn't there that much. Karen didn't speak Czech, and it was only me. So I still hear it from the girls, why didn't you teach us more Czech? But but that was a little difficult because I was gone a lot on travel.
So it must have been a fascinating period, Karl, traveling the world and I guess seeing firsthand an international organization, and obviously around the world there's been lots of mixed reviews about the efficacy of United Nations, World Bank, and how was that experience for you?
Well, when I started there, the reputation was very good. It was basically the only development agency around. I mean, there was some bilateral, but not much private development finance, and it was kind of the pinnacle of development finance. And over the years, of course, the sources of financing for projects in developing countries multiplied. A lot of more bilateral, more private financing, and the role of the World Bank diminished somewhat, and also became subject to criticism. Compared to Chinese credits for investment, the World Bank comes with a lot of conditions and agreements on policy, on pricing, on many things. And many countries just decided to take the easier route. Although it was not always to their advantage. But it became the World Bank became one player among many. And
But did you feel that, in your role you were able to be effective? You saw change, you saw, positive outcomes from what you were doing?
Yes, it was. Much of it was very satisfying, because you could see after you had discussed at length all the options that were there for investment, and then finance it, and then you went on to supervise the project together with the people who implemented it, and you could see that something was actually going on the ground. I worked mostly in energy projects, infrastructure projects, and it was very motivating to then visit where projects had provided water to rural communities or energy to rural communities, electrification of villages, and you saw that small businesses were cropping up, and people could have their kids study at night with electric light and things like that. So that was rewarding.
Yeah, and got to see the world, I'm sure, traveling to many different countries.
Yes, it's mostly Asia, with little excursions to Latin America and Africa, but not that much. It was mostly based on Asia.
Okay. And Karl, you spoke at the start about, your interest in religious studies. I wanted to know, were you raised in a Christian or a church environment? Was faith part of your upbringing and your formation?
Yeah, it was not a very religious environment. I was baptized Roman Catholic, like practically everybody else in Austria. But my parents were not church-going. My parents had a kind of a gut religiosity, where they were convinced that there is something there, and they went through some of the rituals and so on. but they were not the regular churchgoers. So in school, there was Austrian schools have mandatory religious instruction because of an agreement with the Vatican, and so I got lots of religious instruction, catechism, and so on in school. But it did not really move me much towards a religious life or a religiously centered life. And when Karen and I got married, she came from a Presbyterian family, church-going, moderate Presbyterians, pragmatic Presbyterians, and that influenced a lot of what we did, because I was not insisting on any particular denomination, but because Karen came from the Presbyterian family, so we started going to Presbyterian churches and regularly, and then attending with the kids at Sunday school and the whole program, so to speak. And so that acculturated me to a religiously focused everyday life. And but what I found over time was that religion and faith were interesting, and realizing the transcendence of an existence out there was very rewarding. But I wasn't sure that I fitted well into any particular denomination.
Okay.
Roman Catholic, Lutheran, Presbyterian, you name it. I was not ready to just subscribe fully to one set of doctrines. And so I became a more eclectic religious person with people have described me as maybe an Enlightenment deist, or a ecumenical Christian, and with a bit of mysticism thrown in, whether from the Christian or the Sufi side.
Yes.
It's perhaps not a good commitment to a particular set of beliefs, but I find that this eclecticism, this syncretism, fits my outlook.
Well, I think
life.
To me it seems to make sense, given your career, your view of the world is so broad. It'd be odd if then your faith was very narrow.
Right.
You're probably
Yes.
drawing together many strands from so many experiences, so many cultures you've been part of over the years.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Trying to make sense of all that in your faith.
Yes, I mean that it seems to fit my outlook. So that's what I'm pursuing. So it's a constant quest. It's a constant search for truth, for faith, for what is out there, and I find that very satisfying.
So, Karl, 25 years in Washington, D.C., how did you find your way to South Africa and Cape Town in particular?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, when I was getting ready to retire, we were considering what should we do, where should we base ourselves, where should we establish bases. We didn't necessarily want to stay in Washington because we had experienced that, and we were both still restless enough not to settle down that way. Also, the temptation to then stick to what you have been doing before would have been too great. and keep searching to keep doing the same things only from the outside of the World Bank. So we decided that was not it, but then where to go? And we started putting together shortlists, and Austria was not really first choice because that was where I knew what made people tick, and Karen felt a little bit of an outsider. But we established shortlists, and we wanted a good climate, no snowy winters, and we wanted a good cultural depth and historical depth of a place, a good university, so I could do something, good landscape and gardens and a good art scene that Karen was also keen on. And one of the criteria was, after having lived in London for some time, Karen wanted a place where they serve good tea. And that's not continental Europe. That is not where you get good tea. It's Austria was a big disappointment for her in terms of tea, and in the United States also. It's not really a culture. So Cape Town fulfilled a lot of these criteria. And we had friends who had retired here, whom we had met in Asia and visited them in Thailand, in Vietnam, in Korea, and so on. They were based in various places, and they retired here. And Karen visited them and came back and said, you know what, this is a good place. Go and look at it next time you travel that way. And let's think about that. And so that's how we narrowed down our choices and established a base here. And we still kept a base in Michigan, where Karen's from, and where her relatives are. So we kept a small base there. And then eventually we also established a base in Austria, so we would spend summers wherever summers happen, and
follow the sun.
Yeah, follow the sun, and so that's how we ended up here and spending about half the year, the warm season here, and then escape to the northern summer.
Yeah, and split between Michigan and
split that.
And you said Austria. Is it Vienna or?
It's outside Vienna. It's an old spa town which is outside Vienna, about 40 kilometers outside Vienna. It's very easy to get into Vienna, but it's a nice little town. It's been a spa town since Roman times, and. It's very pleasant. It's compact. It's got good cultural offerings because it's been a spa and resort for a long time.
Wonderful.
So that's where we established another base, and so now we are triangulating between these various places.
And your daughters, where are they?
Mostly in California, in San Diego, in Southern California. And they also alternate a bit between Michigan and California, but the base is pretty much Southern California. And that's where our older daughter, Christina, lives with her son, John Michael, who now is 20 and is studying at the University of Arizona. So he has flown the nest.
Nice.
and so they, but both daughters are living in basically in Southern California. So
okay. And Karl, how did you find your way to RUC? And what was the attraction of RUC to you?
Well, when we arrived here over 20 years ago, we were looking for Presbyterian type churches. And as we were based in Camps Bay, there was one there, but we found that very charismatic and happy-clappy. So we thought that is not for us. So we tried in Gardens. That was the closest next one. And we liked it, but it was a very homogeneous congregation. And pastor was very nice, and we enjoyed his sermons, and we asked him, well, where do we find out a little bit more about the history of Presbyterianism in South Africa? We would like to learn a little bit more. And he said, well, there's this Reverend Bax over at Rondebosch, and he's kind of the memory and the conscience of the Presbyterian Church in Cape Town, and there you will find a lot from him. So we came, and we greatly enjoyed Douglas's sermons. Because they were so theologically sound and interesting and making you think. So we thought, okay, we'll stay here, and so that was that. And then when Robert took over, we enjoyed his sermons too. It was different from Douglas's, but we found. This is just right for us, somebody who preaches out of the box. And that's exactly what we're looking for, to make us think and make us think differently. And we always compare when we go to the States and go to Karen's old Presbyterian church, or when we in Austria we go to an international English-speaking church in Vienna, which is basically Reformed, and all the sermons that we hear there, we find compared to the ones we have here, very inferior. It's very standard kind of cookie cutter type of sermons, and so we always are happy to come back here. And we used to listen to Douglas. Now we listen to Robert, and with great delight.
Excellent, and I think. You also have a very eclectic community here at RUC with many different people doing many.
Yes, indeed. Yes. It's a nicely diverse church community, which we enjoyed, both enjoyed, and which I still enjoy.
So, Karl, obviously, you suffered a very serious loss in the last, couple of years with Karen's passing.
Yes.
How's that been for you, and how are you doing?
Well, it was a difficult time. It's been 1.5 years now since she passed, and in the beginning, you feel very lost. You feel that half your life has been ripped away from you. After 50 years together. It's a lifetime. And so that was a difficult time to get used to. I had great support from the daughters. They were immensely helpful mentally and bringing me up to a point where I could deal with it. And so the first time it's all you think about regrets. Could I have done more? You are missing your companion of so many years. whom do you talk to about small problems, big problems? It's a very difficult adjustment, and of course, over time, you learn to live with that, and you learn to structure your life so you talk to people and you meet people and so on, so that you avoid thinking too much on your own. So you learn that, and I am continuing the kind of the structure of our annual peregrinations.
So you're going to perpetuate the triangular lifestyle?
I'm trying to, yes, yeah. I mean, that's at the moment. That is, I'm looking for continuity. So that I don't have such a radical break in life. It's difficult enough to lose somebody, but then you don't want to radically change everything else either. So I'm trying to aim for continuity. So still doing as long as health and age allow, still doing the travels.
Right. And you're saying at the start that you're trying to continue your academic work with writing, and now looking for a new project. What does the future hold for Karl?
Well, what does the future hold? It's I'm still interested in the interrelation between religious studies and economics and business, and there's still a lot to be explored in terms of what can each field learn from the other, because the languages are so different. The scientific languages, the intellectual languages are different. There's no real common language between theology and economics. Whatever religion one looks at, my last publication was looking at all the Abrahamic religions, all three of them, and seeing what do they say about conducting business, about living in a market economy, and so on, and how do they compare, and what can theologians and religious thinkers learn from the economists and business people, and vice versa. What can business and economics learn from the religious ethics that is the focus of religious thinkers? And they both have to learn. Many religious thinkers are very disdainful of business and economics, and equally many people on the economic side are thinking that all of this religious ethics is a lot of talk. So a common language has to be found, and I want to go a little bit more in that direction and explore what's possible.
Sounds very exciting, and we look forward to hopefully seeing and reading more about that over time.
I'll get into the habit again of COVID disrupted a lot of things, and universities have become fortresses, and it's difficult to just browse libraries and so on. But I hope in the new academic year things will settle down a little bit.
Great. Well, it's been great to chat this morning, Karl. Thank you so much for sharing, and it's
most welcome.
Delighted that you're with us again, at least for a few weeks. When do you head off again?
In a week, I'm heading off.
Right.
I'm catching up on the visit to America, which I missed this year because of the restrictions, and so I'm spending Thanksgiving with the daughters and parents' relatives in Michigan, and then moving on for Christmas to California with the daughters and grandson.
Wonderful.
And so I'm looking forward to that very much.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Karl. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.